Hello fellow history lovers and welcome back to my channel. My name is Philippa Lacey Brewell and this is This Week in British History. And if you enjoy it, please do remember to subscribe. There's a subscribe button somewhere here and click the bell for notifications so that you get to hear about every time I upload a new one of these videos and some of the bonus ones as well that I do. You can also give me a thumbs up if you like it, and please do comment below. Also, you'll be able to find some more information in the show notes. In there I've put a list of my sources, but also links to further reading and further watching that you may enjoy if you like some of the topics that we covered today. This week we are covering some of the events which happened between the 10th and the 16th of February in British history. And the Tudors feature heavily again this week. We have a death, another death, a birth, and another death, a funeral. But then we have the wedding of Queen Victoria, and we have British illustrator turned archaeologist Howard Carter discovering the tomb of Tutankhamun. So let's get started. On the 10th of February 1840, Queen Victoria married Prince Albert. Victoria had been queen on her own without a husband for almost 3 years. Although when she came to the throne, people thought she wouldn't last very long on her own, she had concerns about taking a husband, as our other favourite queen, Queen Elizabeth, did as well. A husband would surely be a controlling influence and she would lose her independence. But her and Albert were genuinely in love. Their engagement had been announced the previous November and arrangements had begun in earnest for their wedding at St James's Palace. Victoria, as Queen, had had to propose to Albert, not the other way round, and she had actually done that on the 15th of October. And this was a proper love match, which we now know when we look back on her reign and know that she was in mourning for so long of her life. She missed Albert horrendously after he died. But this was a happy time. This was their wedding. Royal weddings were traditionally private affairs. The procession would be a public affair and people would be able to see Victoria. She chose, famously, a dress of white, which as opposed to crimson, which was more traditional, but she chose white and that helped her be visible to the crowds also. And now she's credited with the fact that most brides choose to wear white on their wedding day. On the day, the rain poured, a bit like it is here today while I'm trying to film this, which is why it's a bit dull in here. But that did nothing to dampen Victoria's spirits or that of the crowd that had turned out to see her, including Florence Nightingale, who noted that Albert looked like he had borrowed the clothes that he was going to be married in, and that would be because he was actually in the uniform of a British field marshal. Of course, Albert was a German prince. Despite concerns about the vow to obey her husband, Victoria had insisted on keeping that in there. In reality, she probably did what every wife did and obeyed when necessary. But so they had their ceremony at St James's Palace. The wedding breakfast was held at Buckingham Palace, and following the wedding breakfast, the couple went to Windsor Castle. On the 11th of February 1503, Elizabeth of York, wife of Henry VII, mother of Henry VIII, died in the royal apartments at the Tower of London. She had given birth to a baby girl called Katherine, but unfortunately neither the baby nor the mother could survive. Elizabeth had died on her 37th birthday. Her and Henry VII had 3 surviving children, their eldest son Arthur having died the previous year, hence why they were trying for another son. They had Margaret left, Mary and Henry, who would become Henry VIII. Now, there's going to be plenty of stories around Elizabeth of York out around on the internet during the week of her death. What I would like to show you is something called the VIII Passional. And this is a book that was commissioned, well, we don't know exactly who commissioned it. We're possibly thinking that it could have been commissioned by Henry VII as a sort of a comfort, a way of making sense of the loss of both his heir and his wife in such a short period of time, that it would help understand how this was part of God's plan. And it is an amazing piece of work, and it was found a few years ago in the, I think it was the National Archives of Wales. And the VIII Passionale was created probably by one scribe, and I think we should allow ourselves to believe that it was commissioned for Henry VII, that it was given to him in some sort of gesture of comfort following the death of both his heir and his consort, and see it as quite a human side of a king and the royal family. This man consumed by grief, who had to remain in his duties, who had to carry on with his job, with no time to come to terms with this loss. And also, heartbreakingly, we can see in this picture that's in the front of this book the suffering of the children at the death of their mother as well. The illustration that I'm drawing your attention to is the first in this book, and in it you can see a man on a throne being presented a book. Perhaps so this is Henry VII being presented with this very book. To the left we see two girls wearing black hoods sitting in front of a fire. These could have been Henry VII's surviving daughters, Margaret and Mary. Behind them is the most heartbreaking scene: a young boy with his head in his arms, possibly crying at the empty, black swathed bed of his dead mother. And this is the figure that is believed to be Henry VIII as the 11-year-old Prince Henry. On the 12th of February 1554, Lady Jane Grey was executed within the walls of the Tower of London. Lady Jane, or we should really call her Queen Jane, had become queen on the death of Edward VI, but she had been deposed by Mary, who became Mary I. She's known as the 9 days queen, but in fact she was queen for 13 days if you take the time from the death of Edward to Mary I deposing her and becoming queen herself and being proclaimed in London as queen. Now, that was the previous July, and so it can be a surprise to some people that it was actually 6 months later that Jane lost her head. She had been put into Edward's device for his succession at his own request, at his own will, because he saw Lady Jane as rightful heir. We know Lady Jane as the 9 days queen because she was proclaimed in London as queen on the 10th of July, and Mary was proclaimed queen in London on the 19th of July. However, Edward had died on the 6th of July, so she would have actually become queen from that point. Edward had named Jane as his successor. I think initially when he put Jane into the line of succession, thinking that he would live long enough for there to possibly be sons in the Grey line that could have taken the throne. But Edward died much quicker than anyone, including himself, had anticipated. The reason he didn't put his half-sisters Elizabeth or Mary into the succession was he genuinely believed, either on a moral or legal or both basis, that neither of them actually had a claim to the throne because they were illegitimate, and by law illegitimate children could not inherit anything, let alone the throne. Jane may have been a woman, but and her claim completely through a female line from Henry VIII's sister Mary, but it was at least legitimate. Jane had been in the Tower since she had gone there to prepare for her coronation, and so this is 6 months hence, from July through to the February when she actually was executed. And she may actually have lived, or at least for longer, had there not been a failed rebellion against Queen Mary I. It was known as the White Rebellion, and its aim was to overthrow Mary I's forces, depose her, and Jane was their figurehead. She was the one they were going to make queen again. It was a Protestant rebellion, and we can't take that out of the equation, unfortunately. Mary probably had little choice but to have Jane's execution arranged, even though she had not been personally involved in the rebellion. Jane had been tried for treason alongside her along with her husband Guildford Dudley the previous November 1553, at London Guildhall, and they had been found guilty. The Wyatt Rebellion really forced Mary's hand. Despite there being a stay of execution, Jane was beheaded at the Tower of London on the 12th of February 1554, and she is laid to rest in St Peter ad Vincula within the walls of the Tower of London. On the 13th of February 1542, and Henry VIII's fifth wife is executed. Katherine Howard was found guilty of adultery against the king and treason, and had lost her life as a consequence. Now, I am going to point you in the direction of a fantastic writer and historian, Gareth Russell, who, if you want to know about Katherine Howard, this is where you need to go. His book about Katherine Howard, Young and Damned and Fair, is one of the best researched and told biographies I think I've ever read. Well worth it. And you can also find him on Facebook. So Katherine Howard, another Tudor queen who was executed in This Week in British History. On the 16th of February 1547, Henry VIII is buried at Windsor Castle. He had died on the 28th of January at Whitehall Palace at the age of 55. Henry's death was kept secret for a couple of days because the transition to a council, because his 9-year-old son was too young to take the throne in his own right. Edward VI was obviously only 9 years old. That transition had to be carefully managed. All planned out, and actually so was Henry's funeral. Everything had to be managed in minute detail. The ceremony and pageantry of the funeral had to reaffirm to the country that the Tudors were the rightful rulers of the country. This is still a fledgling dynasty. The entire Tudor dynasty, as a tangent, was only 113 years. So we're still young into that as well. And so a funeral is an opportunity for the message to be hammered home, is a phrase that I use, that the Tudors are the rightful heirs. And obviously Henry VIII has died, but Edward VI, his son, is now on the throne, and all is going to be well. So Henry's funeral procession had left on the 14th of February and had one overnight stay in Sion Abbey. And that's where the story of the dogs licking the blood comes from, which I will put a link in the show notes for you to go and look at that in more detail as well. But the procession was 4 miles long. Henry's body was pulled on a carriage pulled by 8 horses. The coffin was draped in cloth of gold with an effigy of Henry on the top, and this was an impressive sight for anyone who saw the procession. The ceremony too was probably as Henry would have wanted. The procession had done well at showing this Renaissance prince was going to be much missed, and the ceremony taken by Stephen Gardiner, the Bishop of Winchester. Henry's coffin was lowered into its temporary place next to his third wife, Jane Seymour, Edward VI's mother. The white wands of office broken now and followed him into the grave, as was customary. As for the instructions Henry left for his tomb, in his will he had requested a convenient altar honourably prepared and apparelled with all manner of things requisite and necessary for daily masses, there to be said perpetually while the world shall endure. However, neither the tomb nor the masses were completed as Henry had stipulated. Now, if you want to know more about why Henry is still in his temporary tomb in St George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, then check out this video, my most popular video to date, still going strong, and I go into all of the reasons why Henry is still where, like I say, in the choir at St George's Chapel, Windsor, and why he was never moved to the tomb that he had, well, the tomb was never built and why he was never moved to it. A black marble sarcophagus confiscated from Cardinal Wolsey by Henry was already at Windsor. Now, thanks to John Speed, the 17th century mapmaker and antiquarian, in his 1627 book, The History of Great Britain, we're able to get an understanding of how Henry planned to use this sarcophagus for himself. Fortuitously, for the original manuscript has unfortunately gone missing, Speed transcribes the instructions Henry left for a double tomb, magnificent in size, decoration and iconography. It's described in just over 1,400 words, and plans included effigies of the king and queen as if sleeping. There were going to be numerous angels, prophets aloft columns, scriptures and children with baskets of red and white roses, scattering them down over the tomb and the pavement beyond. It would have been fabulous, very Henry-esque. However, the sarcophagus remained at Windsor for over 250 years until the Georgians found a use for it and transported it to the crypt of St Paul's Cathedral in London, where it now holds the coffin of Admiral Horatio Nelson. I've actually covered the funeral of Nelson in a previous video, which should be coming up here now, so you can click on that if you'd like to know more. And again, a reminder that if you want to find out why Henry is still in St George's Chapel, Windsor, and didn't get the fabulous tomb that he had designed and left instruction for, again, please go and find this video. You will really enjoy it. I'll also put a link in the show notes to it. On the 16th of February 1923, a British archaeologist called Howard Carter opened up the inner chamber of the tomb of Tutankhamun to discover his sarcophagus. Howard Carter had been born in London in 1874 and had actually missed out on a lot of schooling due to ill health, but he was a particularly talented artist and painter. Family connections led him to being introduced to a well-known Egyptologist called Percy Newberry, who was looking for an artist for his archaeological expeditions in Egypt. That expedition changed Carter's life, and his passion turned from being an artist to an archaeologist. His experience and reputation grew, and in 1907 Carter was recommended to Lord Carnarvon. Lord Carnarvon, who is of Highclere Castle, better known to everyone in the world at present as Downton Abbey, but yeah, Lord Carnarvon of Highclere Castle employed Carter to go with him to the Valley of the Kings and the search for the tomb of Tutankhamun. Howard Carter had been trying to find the tomb of Tutankhamun for 6 years when, on his last chance given by Lord Carnarvon, who was funding these trips, a boy who went to fetch water for them whilst tapping into the sand to try and find water found a step. The step was excavated, more steps were found, and that led to a sealed door. 3 weeks later, we're in November 1922, and Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon stood at the sealed doorway when it was opened to reveal what is now known to have been the antechamber, containing significant amounts of intact treasures and artefacts, the biggest to be discovered, thereby elevating the name of Tutankhamun into the history books as one of the most famous pharaoh kings. Once the antechamber's contents had been logged and removed, then they could open the door to the next chamber, and this is what happened on the 16th of February 1923. They opened the door, which was guarded by 2 statues, and it revealed the actual burial chamber of King Tutankhamun himself. Thank you so much for watching this episode of This Week in British History. If you've enjoyed it, please do give me the thumbs up and feel free to leave a comment. I try and respond to every comment on the videos, so please feel free to do that. If you want any further information on the topics that we've covered, then have a look in the show notes. I've included some really good links there to some interesting content. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, please, and hit the bell for notifications so that you know when I upload a new video. But for now, thank you ever so much for joining me, and I will see you again next time.